What happens when your entire life changes overnight and nothing turns out the way you thought it would? In this episode, we speak with someone whose version of success was forever altered after a life changing brain aneurysm. What followed wasn't just a recovery, it was a radical reimagining of purpose, identity, and human connection. This is a conversation about surrendering the script, choosing presence over perfection, and learning to find meaning in unexpected spaces. Today's guest is Andrew Davey. Andrew has worked in theater, finance, and education. He has taught English and creative writing at the middle, high school, and college levels, working with students who have learning differences and ADHD, as well as English learners in the United States, Hong Kong, Macau. Did I
Yeah,
pronounce that correct?
Macau. Yeah,
Awesome. On a Fulbright grant. He has written short stories and novellas, co hosting a music review show, and volunteers. In 2018, he survived a ruptured brain aneurysm and a brain hemorrhage. He recently graduated with a clinical mental health counseling degree, practices as an LGPC, consults for James Mason University about brain injury assessments, is a member of the Virginia Brain Injury Council, and before her passing, he cared for his mother while she had ALS. Andrew, welcome to Flying Upstream.
well, thank you so much for having me.
It is my pleasure. I'm so ready to dig in. I have a lot of questions about your journey, but let's start with before the aneurysm.
Okay.
You had a pretty clear picture of what success looked like, a pretty good definition. Can you walk me through how that picture was built and how it began to unravel?
Sure. Well, I had always wanted to pursue writing as a career. Originally, I wanted to be a filmmaker. Um, so when I went to undergrad, I was a theater major. So I sort of got an opportunity to begin writing while I was there. I wrote a one-act play that was performed at the Black Box Theater at the school. Um, And when I graduated, my thought was, well, I will pursue a writing career, but I'll need to find a day job. So I had probably for the next 8 years or so, I had jobs working in finance for a theater company. Um, but the goal was always to pursue writing as so success for me would include probably getting married someday and having a family, but becoming a published author and making a living from writing. So that was, and I found teaching when I went back to grad school to get my degree in creative writing. I had the opportunity to teach, and that felt like rather than transitioning between day jobs, I thought I will pursue teaching since I felt a connection there and it was an enjoyable time for me while I could still write kind of in the background. So that's where I was about by 2018. I think I had been teaching since 2011, maybe. So about 7 years.
That's pretty amazing. So, did you also fall in love with teaching by way of kind of thinking these two things can kind of go together? Did you fall in love with teaching, or was that something that was more of like, I'll do this only, and there wasn't any more passion other than the reason to be able to pursue your writing at the same time?
It was a little bit of both. I really enjoyed um, sharing moments of grace with students. I was never the teacher who was going to have the best syllabus or who was going to present the material in the best way, but I could connect with a student who felt um, sort of troubled or disillusioned or who had anxiety about being a teenager. And I could sort of provide for them an example of somebody who's been there before. I know what it's like. Um, so that was really enjoyable, really being able to kind of connect with students. Um, So it became more than just a job, but I would have also been fine not teaching anymore. For example, had I been able to have a successful writing career, it would have been very easy to leave the teaching game behind.
Gotcha. So tell me about the aneurysm for people who've never experienced one, people who don't know. What was that journey like? What led you to a doctor? If that's how you found out, what was that whole experience?
So an aneurysm is basically when a blood vessel uh, can burst. Um, so it can happen anywhere in the body. Mine, so I had finished teaching for the year. Um, my first crime fiction book had been I had pursued prose, and a small press was going to publish my first crime fiction book that was going to come out the following year. So I was really excited. I was going to go visit my parents, um, who lived just outside of Charleston, South Carolina. I was in Alexandria, Virginia at the time. Um, and when I got to the airport, I felt fine. I arrived at my gate and then I started to sweat uncontrollably. And that was um, really the only one of two red flags that sort of hit. I kind of sweating like I had just run a marathon. Um, so I kind of wrote it. This is before COVID, so I sort of wrote it off like, okay, maybe I'm coming down with something. And then they called my group to board, and I went to lift my bag, and it felt like I had cinder blocks in the bag. So again, in hindsight, that was another serious red flag. But I thought, okay, I'm getting sick. I scanned my ticket and I started to walk down the jetway, and the floor began to shift like I was at a funhouse at a carnival. Um, and I tripped and fell on the jetway. Now, fortunately, none of it was painful. Um, People will often report having the worst headache of your life
Mhm.
when you have like a ruptured brain aneurysm, like I did. I avoided all of that. Um, and fortunately for me, it happened when I was in public. So that's what allowed me to kind of survive the initial. Most people who have what I had, who have a ruptured brain aneurysm, they usually don't survive the initial trauma. Or it can, if it happens when you're not in front of people, no one knows about it. So
Ouch.
for me, I was extremely fortunate that it happened where it did, when it did, at an airport early in the morning, as I was about to board the plane, so first responders could get to me. Um, the last thing I remember saying was, "I can't miss my flight," because all I could think about was how upset my mother would be that I was going to miss my flight. Um, and then someone laughed and said, "Don't worry, we can get you on another flight." And I said, okay. And I guess they began putting a neck brace on and stuff like that. Then I lost consciousness. Um, so what happened with me is I was taken to the hospital and I went into surgery. I guess they figured out what had happened. Um, and JetBlue, the airline that I was flying, called my mom because I had filled out the emergency contact form, but all they knew was that I missed the flight because something had happened. So for a few hours, the general consensus was just that I was a klutz, that I may have tripped and fallen. Um, and then someone in the surgery team found my cell phone and saw a bunch of missed calls and recognized the same last name. So they called and let my family know what had happened to me. So they all flew up or drove up to DC. Um, So that's how everybody found out about it. And then I was in intensive care for about 3 weeks that I don't have any memory of. But I've seen cell phone videos of me, being up and talking to people and doing things. I just don't remember any of it. And go on, please.
And how was that journey, that recovery? Because you've kind of accomplished like the first part of your dream, right? Like you're gonna be published soon. And now you have to go through this physical and this emotional recovery and essentially reshape your identity. What was that like?
Well, so what I would learn is the emotional recovery wouldn't happen until after the physical recovery began to taper off.
Mhm.
So I didn't really understand what was in store for me really in the first like 9 months or so. I was so focused on just um, walking without a cane and building up my endurance. I had double vision. So a lot of almost all of my focus was just on getting better physically. It really wasn't until um, the end of the first year that I started to think about, okay, what's life going to be like now? Um, and also, uh, the aneurysm really affected a lot of my emotional processing. So I'm really fortunate now, almost 7 years later, or over 7 years later. Um, my physical limitations are very minimal. My balance still isn't 100%. And if I move my head from side to side, I have to wait for my vision to settle. It's
Okay.
sort of like the sensation you get when you step off a merry-go-round. Um,
Like,
but
okay.
I don't get nauseated. So by now, I've just sort of accepted, like, okay, if I'm going to turn around 180 degrees, I need to wait a second before I move because I have to wait for the world to catch up with me. But going into 2019, the shock of everything sort of wore off. And then it was kind of like, okay, um, now you're going to have to kind of reflect on what's important. What are your priorities? What's valuable to you? I had assumed um, the book did come out in 2019, and I expected it to open a lot of doors for me, career wise, or just I don't even really know what I had expected. It was so much just trying to get there that once I got there, it was sort of like, okay, now what do I do with this? So um, the book came out, very little changed. And then it was also like, okay, and now you have to adjust to life post injury. So that's really where things kind of got much more overwhelming. I started seeing a therapist to help with PTSD. And that's sort of when the recovery began in earnest, um, where I began thinking about, okay, how do you, and that was a very difficult time. I started taking Prozac for depression. Um, and I guess about uh, February of 2020, I was ready to sort of revisit going back to work and doing things like that. I tried to substitute teach in my old school, but it was a little too overwhelming.
Yeah.
So I had gotten a job as a tutor at a tutoring center that was going to begin in April of 2020, which of course is when COVID hit. So my job never happened. And instead, I moved in with my parents again, um, which really kind of allowed me to emotionally adjust to everything,
Mhm.
because I didn't have to worry about, um, going grocery shopping or doing the day to day things that I would have had to. This time, I could just kind of focus on, okay, how are we going to feel more comfortable with life? Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
so that's really kind of what helped. And just really sort of accepting it was finally when my desire to accept things and my ability to accept the reality of what the situation was like um, happened, because I had the time to just do that.
Yeah, and that's beautiful. I'm glad you share that because for a lot of us, when we find ourselves in a place where we have to go live back with our parents for any reason, or we kind of have to give up that sort of independence that we have now become so used to, it can really seem like a failure. And that's the way that most of us look at it. And we kind of swallow up whatever it is that we're feeling and all the discomfort. But I'm glad that you pointed out what it allowed you to not focus on and pointed out what it did allow you to focus on, because it allowed you to heal. And sometimes we have to, not sometimes, I would say all of the time, there's something that we have to give up in order to heal and to get to that place where we need to be. And that's not easy. And in your situation, you had already been doing that from a physical perspective, but now from a mental and emotional perspective, kind of took a load off in terms of the mental stuff where, you know, you don't have to worry about grocery shopping, about the cleaning, and about the daily things that we all have to take care of because they're part of, you know, just being human. Um, and I love that you share that, because sometimes we can get stuck there on our journey to kind of find fulfillment and recreate our lives in the way that we want it to. It can be really hard to kind of see and value the importance of community and of other people. And that's what got you to that next step.
Yeah, I would say the being growing having grown up in New York City in the 90s, success, I was conditioned by just the culture, really. My parents did a great job never really conditioning me, but growing up, the expectation of what success looked like was something very specific. And then the aneurysm sort of undid a lot of that conditioning because I was forced to reconsider um, what was now valuable or possible.
Yeah. And that's beautiful. So you later on, so, and back me up here if I'm jumping around in the story, but I guess I'll ask you directly actually. So, what happens next? You move in with your parents and you're able to kind of start healing from that mental, emotional aspect. What happens next in your journey?
So I was there for about a year, um, and I moved back to my apartment. Uh, I had decided to find a new career path, um, and really, what helped was I asked myself, during this recovery, what have been moments that have really allowed you to feel fulfilled, or at least better. And it was always when I communicated with someone else who'd had a brain injury, and they could confirm that what I was feeling wasn't unique to me.
Mm,
Um, and I thought, you know what? If I can do that for someone else, perhaps I should become a therapist. Um, and that's sort of what led me to going back to school for counseling. So um,
I love
when
that.
I moved back, I started school, uh, and I found a place called the Chicago School, which was easy to get to in DC. They had in-person classes, which is what I was looking for. So I think in January of 2022, I started my program. So I was back here for that, and then I think in May of 2022, my mother was diagnosed with ALS, or Lou Gehrig's disease. So for a while, I went to school while she was being treated, and then eventually, I would say in late June of 2023, it got to the point where she needed 24-hour care, and my parents had an aide that would come in during the day, and then my father would sort of take over at night. Um, and it got to the point where it was really overwhelming for him to be the only person uh, that was sort of steering the ship. So, because I was pretty much finished with school, I just had a few classes left, and my internship that I was working was virtual. I could move back in with my parents again and kind of become her primary caregiver, and help out and alleviate some of the stress from my father. Um, and then that turned out to be the fulfilling thing that I was sort of looking for during the emotional recovery. What was going to replace being a published author, starting my own family, doing those sorts of things. And it turned out being a caregiver for my mother was that fulfilling thing.
What was the difference for you, you know, in what you expected fulfillment to feel like and what it actually felt like when you finally reached that?
I think, like with a lot of things, we have we have expectations of what something will be like. Like when you, for example, when I turn 21, this is what it's going to feel like. Um, so for me, it kind of happened in hindsight. It was sort of like I woke up one day and I realized, like, oh, this is what uh, you know uh, putting the medications together for mom and making sure that she's having a good day, that's that feeling that you get in your chest, that's the fulfillment that I thought would have come from something else, or that I had hoped would come from something else. So a lot of it was just being aware um, of I also began working with a therapist who practices somatic experience, which helps you to sort of get in touch with your emotions. Um, so I think working with her and getting more in touch with the subtle ways in which I process emotions now, as opposed to more of the overt and blunt ways that it used to be.
Mm.
So kind of for me, it was just in hindsight recognizing, um, okay, I had assumed fulfillment would look like X, and in reality, fulfillment looks like Y. Um, and really just being able to understand the value of that. Um, Whereas before, I think I would have said, well, being 45 or 46 and living with your parents isn't really a sign of success. Um, Whereas now I can sort of, I look at it more like I have the opportunity to spend time with my parents at that age. Most people don't get that. So I've really been able to kind of shift my perspective, which has helped.
I love that. What would you say to someone who is struggling with that? Who's struggling with the notion that the way they had previously expected success to feel is so different now?
Well, I think a lot of it is just being aware, not really fighting against it. I think I always, with a lot of my clients, one of the things we always work on is managing your expectations. Um, so I think in the beginning, it's sort of like just be aware of how you're perceiving things, and then take a step back, um, and reevaluate it, really. Um, I think a lot of the time we value what success is based on something we've read or seen or heard or imagined, and not from any sort of objective point of view. So I think the more you can call into question, sort of like, where does this come from? Then that's probably a way to do it.
I love that. And it's so important because there's a lot of conditioning that goes to, and I'm speaking from my own experience, a lot of conditioning that goes into the way that we define success and the way that we think it should look and the way that we think it's going to feel. And then when we kind of realize, at least in my own experience, when I realized that success looks nothing like what I thought it looked like, especially I grew up in the 90s too, and it was different. It was nothing like what it feels like today. You mentioned something, I read a little something about you about how comedy has kind of played a role in this. And as we take sort of a little bit of a lighter note, can you
Sure.
tell me a little bit about that? How has comedy played a role in all of this?
Yeah. Well, so I forgot who said. I think it was Jack Parr, or one of the talk show hosts who had the Tonight Show, that comedy is just tragedy plus time. And there have been really funny things that I've experienced when I was in intensive care, that I don't remember doing this, but apparently my parents tried to get into my laptop and needed my password. And I would get to on the cusp of telling them what the password was, and then I wouldn't, because I would say, you're not supposed to share this information. Um, So that's there have also like one of the things that really changed was I had previously always thought um, that I would either get married or be in a serious romantic relationship because uh, that type of relationship would be the only way that I could find real, true love and support from someone. Um, so I
Mhm.
went back into the online dating game because these days that's sort of the only option. Um, and all of my dates sort of resembled like a Seinfeld or Curb Your Enthusiasm episode where it was like, do you bring up that you've had a ruptured brain aneurysm? And if so, when do you bring that up? Do you say, like, hey, do you want to split the nachos? By the way, do you know what a subarachnoid hemorrhage is? Um, so a lot of it was recognizing um, I have a really good friend right now who I used to run a music review show with, um, who lives in Illinois, um, and she's been really supportive and helpful. She's married, um, so she and I have the type of friendship that provides the support that I thought was only reserved for a married couple. So a lot of the last couple of years, um, the aneurysm, while really unpleasant and unfortunate, kind of allowed me to undo a lot of the perceptions I had
Mhm.
about life, what was valuable, how to go about looking at things, um, just in general. So, and really, a lot of it in terms of comedy. You know, being able to look at something in a way that you don't allow for it to really be overwhelming. Um, they're for those of you who don't know, ALS is a degenerative condition where you lose control of your muscles, and it's usually pretty slow. It happens over time to the point where um, at the end, my mother couldn't talk. She couldn't really move anything except her index finger. Um, and you wouldn't think that we would laugh or have as much fun as we did every day, but we would always find ways to have inside jokes. Or she had an eye gaze machine, so she it would track her vision, so she could speak by typing with her eyes. Um, and there were a lot of really she used to write a lot of really funny things, and her timing was still really good, even though sometimes she would be responding to something that was said a few minutes ago. But yeah, I mean, you can choose to look at it like this is really awful, and and it's okay to do that. I mean, there were still moments that were really sad and really tragic, but for the most part, if you look for those opportunities, you can find them. So I've been able to do that. Really, it took about 3 years for me to feel comfortable moving forward with I guess what the new normal is, just in terms of feeling like I could find um, joy and fulfillment again. And I've been really fortunate that I've been able to do that.
Yeah.
A lot of my in some of the volunteering that I've done and in some of the support groups I've been to, I've made a lot of friends who are recovering from traumatic or acquired brain injuries.
Yeah.
And many of them have severe cognitive limitations, or they were forced to retire and go on disability. Um, and they would love to go back to work, but they can't. So
Yeah.
I'm really fortunate for myself that I can do a lot of things. I don't have very many limitations, but I also feel like I owe it to everyone else that can't go back to really make the most of this second chance.
That's absolutely beautiful. And so today that you've graduated and you are a mental health practitioner, how do you incorporate what you've been through into your practice and into the clients that you work with?
Well, I depending on who the client is, I will disclose that I've had a ruptured brain aneurysm, which people, and then when I explain sometimes what that included, there's a universal quality to being through a traumatic experience. So um, I can usually share approaches that helped me with people from firsthand experience. Um, but also, I found, particularly like with grief, I counsel people with grief a lot of the time. And um, there's always the question of what do I say or what do I do? How do I help someone who's grieving?
Mm.
And um, really, a lot of it is just being present. That's one thing I've learned from this experience. Most people try to solve a problem, like if you are recovering from something, they'll want to make you feel better, and that's not really something that just takes time a lot of the time. So if you can just be present, and listen and say, I can't help you make it through this right now, but I can be here with you while you're making it through. And that's something that's really been helpful to articulate to people as a way to kind of help them deal with their own issues or be supportive of someone else.
Thank you so much. This has been an amazing, amazing conversation. As we get ready to wrap up, I have one last question for you. Is there a mantra, a lesson, or a story that you return to yourself to sort of stay grounded when chaos is what's happening all around us and we have no control over it?
Absolutely. I think of a Taoist parable about a farmer who finds a horse. Um, so he finds I'm sorry, his he has a horse that escapes from his barn, and his neighbor comes over and says, "That's so awful, you lost a horse." And the farmer says, "Well, let's see." So the next day, the horse returns and it brings 5 wild horses with it. So then the farmer says, "Oh, what great fortune! You have 6 horses now." And the farmer says, "Well, let's see." So the farmer's son tries to train one of the wild horses, gets thrown and breaks his leg. And the neighbor says, "Oh, what bad luck! Your son has a broken leg." And the farmer says, "Well, let's see." So the following day, the army comes to conscript all the able bodied young people of the village to go fight, and they can't take the son because he has a broken leg. So I always tend to think that we judge things very quickly as either being good or bad before it has the opportunity to play out. So I think often my ability to make emotional connections was blunted by the aneurysm, which means that it's much more difficult for me to experience joy. But I also am not overwhelmed by sadness. So that really helped taking care of my mother when it was really tragic and people would be emotionally overwhelmed. I could sort of remain objective. Um, so I often think about how sometimes there's a silver lining kind of waiting to play out, and other times we just need an event to keep unraveling before we sort of accept that it's begun or it's ended.
That's absolutely beautiful. And if someone wanted to get a hold of you, to work with you, to talk to you maybe about their experience, where could they find you?
So I have a website. It's Andrew-Davie, Davie.com, and that has links to all my writing. It has a contact button, and that's probably the best way people can get a hold of me.
I love that. For everyone watching and listening, thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you for listening to Andrew's story. And I hope that you've taken something absolutely beautiful away from it. I know that I have. Andrew, thank you so much for being on today.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Of course. And to you, Free Spirit, thank you for flying with us today. And remember that sometimes the life you never planned ends up being the one that sets you free. For more stories, behind the scenes magic, and resources to guide your journey, come find us at flyingupstreampodcast.com. You belong here. Until next time.